see no one's choosing to use the virtual background feature. That can always be fun.
Wait a minute.
Still actually on a beach?
Joel
Yes,
Montgomery looks
that
like
would be
he's on
nice.
the beach.
I am not at the beach. I wish I was.
All
I had
right.
to cancel my beach trip, so
No.
Oh yeah, Joel's using the virtual. There it is. Yeah, I see the captain.
I couldn't have figured it out, or I would have been at the beach too. So can we get everybody's face? Is that little square? Okay, never mind. I got it.
we look like the Brady Bunch to you now.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Joel, your palm trees are even blowing in the wind.
I know.
That's impressive.
Waves are coming in.
If my hair starts blowing, then you can be suspicious.
Okay. All right, so we are live. If there are any current viewers, we have 2 watching. So hello to whoever's watching us on YouTube right now. This will be the April 8th meeting of the City of Worcester Charter Review Commission. I'll turn it over to our chair in just a moment, but I wanted to say everybody who is watching, welcome. There is a chat feature, so if you would like to say something that the commission will recognize, please put it in the chat. And when you are in the chats, I will then bring up those items as long as they are appropriate to the commission. You just make sure you type in there. I will be monitoring it and I will let them know what you have to say. Other than that, I will turn it over to Judge Lizey to get us started.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order at looks like about 5:35. May we have the roll call, Mrs. McKiernan?
Yes. Ray Lizey,
Present.
Carol McKiernan, present. Jennifer Schatzer,
Here,
Mark Weaver, Martha Bollinger,
here,
Beth Patton,
here,
Jolene Dyer,
Present.
Matt Long, Stuart Fitzgibbon,
Here.
Stuart Webster,
Present.
Louise Keating,
Present.
John Scavelli,
Here.
Joel Montgomery,
Here.
Andre Doria.
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum and we'll proceed then. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of March 11th, 2020?
I just have a point of clarification. Is that
Okay.
allowed?
Sure.
Okay. On the first page, section 4.06, the 4th line down. The last part says, Mr. Scavelli said it is in line with the rest of the document. What does that refer to? The word hospital or Worcester Community Hospital?
It was in, when I spoke about it, it was in reference to hospital. I went ahead and made the change that we had requested, which was change it to Worcester Community Hospital. But that's what it was in reference to, was just the word hospital.
So maybe should it be changed into hospital? Because I really didn't know, I couldn't remember. what it meant.
In the minutes, I will tell you that I mean, we could make that note instead of, but that means we couldn't approve them tonight. We'd have to change them.
No, that's okay then, that's okay.
Okay.
All right. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
I move to approve.
Who is that?
Would you identify yourself when you speak?
Jennifer, I move to approve the minutes.
This is Stuart. I'll second.
Mr. Fitzgibbon, seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Now we'll review the draft changes of since our last meeting, or as a result of our last meeting. I'd like to ask Mr. Scrivelli if you would lead us through each article and the changes as they stand at this time. I wanted to ask, we do have on our agenda a discussion of Articles 5 and 6. Would it be your preference to jump over those two and then come back to them when we speak about those two articles?
Well, none of the changes that we made at the last meeting were to either one of those, so we should be good.
All right.
Mostly what we did last time, it's going to be to articles. I want to say it was to the beginning. I don't think we touched 5 at all, and then 6, I don't think so. So I'll be going through them here, and we'll see.
All right.
These are basically changes that were made as a result of our last meeting. You will see them in some color that's different from the other colors in the version of the draft that we sent out today or a couple days ago. It should be pretty quick because the changes were not that drastic, and most of them I think we are all pretty much in agreement with. The first one is that we went ahead and changed. I had 5 resident electors. This is in section 2.03, compensation of bonds for the compensation committee. We went ahead and changed that to 7 because I know the group felt that 7 was more appropriate. So we went ahead and made that change. Any comments from anyone on that?
It says both 5 and 7, Dyer. It says both 5 and 7.
Well, that's because it's
So
the
you'll correct
5
it?
should be crossed out.
Okay,
It depends on how you're viewing it, but the 5 should be crossed out.
okay.
So then we'll move on to, let's see. So we move on to section 3.02, administrative powers.
Oh, excuse me, are you reviewing the ones that we just discussed at the last meeting?
Yeah, these were changes that after we reviewed all the city's changes last time, these were changes that the group wanted to make. And
All right.
so that's
Thank
what
you.
I thought we'd start with, just so we could talk about the changes that as I wrote them, in case anyone wanted something to be different.
All right.
And then we'll move on to 5 and 6, and hopefully this will be a relatively short meeting. We'll see. So next we have section 3.02, and the change here was that we wanted to talk about how the mayor has control over administrative departments. There was a question over that because we did not get to the law department and the finance department part of that until section 4.04. So we added a note in there, and that basically says that. So it now reads, the mayor shall exercise supervision and control over all administrative departments of the city as described in section 4.04 of the charter of the city of Worcester. To make that more clear. So that if someone was ever searching for that, now it kind of guides them to where they need to go. Section 3.04, there was a question at the last meeting as to who the mayor returns ordinances to, and it was suggested we make that more clear, that it's to the clerk of council. So basically that's what we did there. We added in, shall return it to the clerk of council. Any questions on that change? That one's pretty simple, I would think. Okay. Then moving on to section 3.05, vacancy. There was a question about how the mayor is to notify someone if he is unable to perform his duties. And so we had talked about it, and we decided the best way to put that would be to take away that the mayor must do it because someone else may do it for him or her in that case. So we talked about changing it to the clerk of council shall be notified, and that's what we put in there. So that change is now in there. There was also in section C of that same section 3.05, there was also a question about clarifying who the office of the president of council. So now we made that more explicit. So it says now, I think it said until a successor to the office. Now it says until a successor to the office of president of council is elected and qualified, just to make that more clear. Section 4.02, Director of Law. There was a question as to why there was no succession plan for the Director of Law. Same thing for the Director of Finance, which we'll get to next. So what we added in there was Director of Law shall be appointed in accordance with Section 4.04 of the Charter of the City of Worcester. The mayor may also designate a deputy law director who, during the absence or disability of, or during the vacancy in the office of Director of Law, shall exercise the powers and discharge the duties and functions of the Director of Law under the title of Acting Director of Law. The Deputy Director of Law must be an attorney licensed to practice law in the state of Ohio. Now that is mostly taken from the what's already in the charter for the other offices. However, it adds some new things that we've never really had before. And I think I can explain why. I was thinking about this. So the reason why that was probably never there is until recently, the city did not have a deputy law director. And so probably they would have just held off until they hired someone new, I'm assuming. And that's a relatively new thing for the city. Probably, what was it, in probably within the last like four years, probably, right?
No, because we used Scott Boyes as deputy law director back in probably 2008.
Okay.
So, and Andre, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't Stacy considered a assistant law director, I guess, not a deputy law director?
I think she's got deputy director of finance
Okay.
under this.
So what the difficulty in this is that you need to have somebody who is a lawyer. Now, we currently have that. So what I did to, in case we didn't, in case the position of Deputy Director of Law doesn't exist, what we did is we put in there may, specifically because that in the future, that job may or may not be there. If it is, then it works. If it's not, then it doesn't matter because it says may, which allows it to be sort of optional. We don't have to do this. This is just because the group said that they wanted to have some succession plan for the law director.
My apologies, John. I misspoke. Wasn't law director, it was finance director.
Right.
With Scott.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. 'Cause I think Kevin was the first, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So this can be something that, I don't know, does anyone have any input on this? Because this is a little bit of a drastic change, just given the fact that it's sort of, in some ways, it could cement that position. So that may be something, especially that Joel and the mayor may have some insight on, as to whether they think that's a good thing to do. It doesn't make it mandatory.
Okay, you mean the recommendation of having it be an acting director of law until a new director of law can be put in place? Is that correct?
Well, it's specifically, I think the issue that I wanted to bring up to everyone is it specifically talks about a deputy director of law, which is not in the charter now, isn't referenced anywhere. And so it specifically refers to that job. And that's a relatively new job in the city. So that's what I wanted to bring up to everybody prior to moving forward with this particular piece.
The other language you have in there mirrors what's in there for the director of administration and the director of finance.
It does.
The difference is specifying a specific position, which is the deputy director.
Which the reason I chose to write it that way was specifically because you have to have someone who has a law degree. And if you have, for the other positions, they could be anyone who was qualified to do the job. Here you have to have someone who specifically is licensed to practice law.
It almost presupposes that if you appoint, it kind of reads to me like appointing a deputy director of law from the outside that is not intended to become the law director. Does that seem likely?
Well, we have one now.
You have a deputy director of law now?
We do, yes.
All right.
So
prior to that, we only ever had one attorney at the city for forever.
Just seemed that way, Joel.
Any other questions about this? How do we feel about this particular section that written that way? Because this was this was not something the city was looking to do. This came directly from this commission.
So what would you do if we didn't have this in the charter?
Well, I think there's a couple different options. You would have to hire somebody new, but I think probably what would happen in the meantime is you would probably contract out with a law firm to handle that work while you did your search. If you didn't have anyone else, would be most likely be my guess.
Yeah, I would concur with that.
It
Is
seems
that-
re-
Is
Sorry.
that bad?
There's nothing bad about it. It can be expensive depending on who you hire. And generally what we pay, to our deputy director of law and to our law director, depending on how much work they're going to cheaper than what you would pay to charge billable hours. Now it should be temporary, so that's not really the end of the world. And also it also allows, so this section is written in a way where you could designate someone at a law firm that you hired to be the deputy director of law. It doesn't say who they are supposed to be. It also doesn't say they have to be an employee.
It's really sort of a bridge between a law director leaving for some reason, who knows what could be a merit of, but it gives you a bridge until you would appoint a new law director.
It just seems like it gives the mayor the authority to bring somebody in without an argument.
Well, you would need somebody in the interim, so I think that person would probably be brought in by the mayor anyway. And what it does is it's set up to be a temporary thing. It would only be acting director of law. If they wanted to actually turn them into the director of law, you would have to get approval from council for that.
Exactly. It gives more flexibility to the mayor.
For a temporary time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with it.
Okay.
Well, and I think going back to last meeting's discussion, what we were looking for was just to have some consistency structurally in the document for the three key positions.
Correct.
That
And
makes
everybody else, sorry, go ahead.
No, that makes sense. I think that consistency is a good feature to have in a charter.
All right, then moving on. So the director of finance, the only thing we changed in this section was we added in that the director of finance shall be appointed in accordance with section 4.04 of the charter of the city of Worcester. And that's the section that talks about how the law director and the finance director are appointed, because it didn't, in the director of finance section, it didn't say that independently. So we added that because the commission seemed to think that it was something that they wanted in there. So we did that. I think we're just about done with my changes. Yep. That is everything that I had for you today. So my portion is completed, and I'll turn it back over to Judge Lizzie to move on with the agenda.
Okay, with regard to review of sections or articles 5 and 6, my belief is that Mrs. Dyer and Mrs. McKiernan have those sections. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, if you'd like to go ahead with anything you see in those two sections that you believe ought to be changed or corrected or clarified.
Well, as you can see, most of it's already recommended to be eliminated because it's already covered by the civil service ordinances. So you're just removing it because it's redundant. There was just one thing, and I don't know if it's worth taking out I mean, putting on a ballot, I'm just afraid it looks like we're removing a bunch of stuff that, rights that people had. So I'm a little concerned about taking this out, but it's found in section 501. Council shall have the power to adopt by ordinance rules and regulations prescribing the procedures for selection, testing, promotion, demotion, discipline, removal, and retirement of employees. Well, the word retirement, it's not addressed in any of the documents that you now have. It's not in the charter. It's not in the contracts with the unions. It's not in the civil service ordinance. And I talked to Jeanette Wagner about this, and she said she's not aware that, that it's found anywhere because it's all run by the state. It's the OPERS, and that's the retirement, and that's, city doesn't have anything to do with that. So the question is, do you remove that because it's irrelevant? Or do you just leave it in there knowing that it's handled through OPERS? And the second part, after you look through all of the eliminated parts, go to the end of the thing. Section 5.06, political activity. It ends with talking about discipline as provided in section 508. Well, 508 doesn't exist anymore if we go with what we have here. And it should be properly referred to ordinance 2017-26, section 133.14 on discipline. That's the civil service ordinance. If you want to have a reference there about how discipline for political activity, inappropriate political activity would be handled. Those two simple things. As far as the next section, I didn't see anything there. I'm talking with Andre Dordier. He didn't indicate that there was anything that he thought there should be changed.
Let's go back to 5.01 first of all. What do you think, Mr. Scovelli, of that issue?
On the
council lose power to do anything, and is that section useless now?
So 5.01, so we're talking about the council shall have the power to adopt by ordinance rules and regulations prescribing, no, because they still would adopt civil service rules.
Civil service rules are not completely controlled by the state of Ohio. In other words, they can't impose it on a charter city.
Well, no, so the council would still have the power to pass their own civil service rules. We can have whatever civil service rules we choose, as long as we're not doing something illegal. So we can designate them to be what we want them to be. We don't have to follow the state rules, no.
And it was explained to me that whatever Worcester would do would supersede any laws of the state of Ohio because we are a charter city. Our rules supersede state rules.
Correct. Correct. So I think that section still has meaning.
Is it worth it to eliminate retirement because it does not deal with retirement?
Well, what I don't think so, because you may at some point need to talk about that. You never know. So I think you might as well leave it. It doesn't, just something's in there that doesn't have an effect now, doesn't mean we wouldn't want to leave that open in case we had to make some rule about that in the future in the civil service rule. So I would say leave it.
There are some references to things like severance pay upon retirement in like collective bargaining agreements, which council does, approve and adopt by ordinance. So there is a connection there.
Okay, so then it is appropriate to leave it in.
I would vote yes on that, yes.
Okay.
The collective bargaining agreement doesn't say retirement as a section, but if you look under severance pay in the collective bargaining agreements, it'll state upon retirement, and they do establish certain payouts, how much of your accumulated sick leave and vacation care when you retire.
Jolene, could you repeat the section you referred to?
Yes. It's the last one,
Mhm.
5.06 political activity. And the last sentence says, any employee who violates this section shall be subject to discipline as provided in section 508 of this charter. And 508 would no longer exist. And Jeanette Wagner said that a proper reference would be to civil service rules and regulations, which is ordinance 2017-26, section 133.14.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend referencing an ordinance since those things change. But if you reference 5.05, which is the one right above that used to be 5.08, then it references
Says, yeah,
civil service rules, collective bargaining agreements, and those things.
okay. So then you would change 5.08 to 5.05.
That would make sense to me.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
does.
I would agree with that.
Good catch, Jolene.
Yeah, because the edit to section 505, it used to be 508.
Carol, did you get that?
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. That takes care of that matter then.
Well, Carol, do you have something?
I don't really, I think we've discussed Article 5 in depth before. The retirement thing's a good catch, Jolene. And in taxation and finance, I had a question about the budget.
Yes.
Let me get this where I can see it. The mayor submits the budget in November. Does the budget have to have 3 readings? Or is it just the one?
It
and it's
doesn't.
Approved in December?
It doesn't have to have 3 readings, but every budget I've ever been involved with has always gone 3 readings because council members want the public to understand and have as much opportunity to comment on the budget as you can. So all legislation has the potential to go to 3 readings, and then it has to either be tabled or voted up or down at that point. So that's why I would assume they'd all go to 3 readings.
So that's really not enough time for 3 readings, is it?
It is. We had to hit it in the last meeting of November, and then the 2 meetings in December.
In December. Okay. All right. That was my only question. Should we say that it may have 3 readings? I didn't ask Andre about this one. That was my only question. Is that enough time? And should we say something about 3 readings and say may have 3 readings? So that if it doesn't work out, you're not in a box.
Well, the nice thing about it, if it doesn't work out, let's see, it goes on to say that if they don't pass a budget of 1/12 will hereby be passed. Let's see.
Section 603.
Yes.
Yeah, you have a fallback position.
Right. So that you can at least operate the government until 1 is passed. So, yeah, I think you're covered there. And as far as the 3 reading rule, I think that's also covered under council rules. And John Scavelli, I'll defer to him, but.
Yeah, okay.
It is.
Does that happen very often that it doesn't pass?
No, I've been here since 2003, and it's passed every time. I think once or twice we've had 1 no vote out of 7 council persons.
Okay.
And that maybe because of, one was because of a street, I remember. They didn't think a street should be paved, so they voted no on the whole budget.
Wow.
Okay, that was my,
Yeah, good question.
usually that was my only question there. And I did talk to you. I appreciated our conversation about the audit.
Yeah.
The only couple things, and I don't think it's worth putting this on the ballot, but under 6.06 and in 6.07, some of those sentences are very complex.
Yeah, and I here, let me see, let me make an attempt to explain 607. So Worcester, the county, Wayne County and the city school district all basically share or have overlapping what's called property tax millage. So the state constitution says if any one of you enacts or issues debt and it causes the obligation to be greater than 1% of this millage, then your millage will be reduced by that amount. That way it doesn't punish the other entities. So if Worcester was heavily ridden with debt, it would not adversely impact the county or the schools. So we start with 4.2 mils, and we can't, without a vote of the people, we can't get more than that. But if we would happen to be issue of a lot of debt, it would protect the county and the schools, and they would actually reduce our millage.
Yeah, okay.
It's a sort of complex formula, but our millage would be reduced if we went over that 1% in the aggregate. So it's a protector for the other two entities that have overlapping millage, and it's in the state constitution that way.
Mhm. Okay, I mean, that's all I had, so I didn't see anything else. Unless anyone else did. So,
Thank you, Mrs. McKernan.
Judge
I'd like to ask
Lizey,
at this time if there's anybody else on the commission have anything on 5 or 6 they'd like to bring up.
Judge Lizey, this is Stuart Fitzgibbon. If I could ask Andre to talk a little bit about section 6.06 and the practice that was adopted after the income tax was increased in the city several years ago, with a portion of that increase going to the capital improvement fund. I don't see anything in the document that codifies that practice.
Yeah. So in was it 2013? 2013, I think when we were campaigning for the tax increase, what the city committed to and what we have done every year thereafter is we committed to at least using 1/2 of what the increase would generate and putting that into what would be considered capital items, which would be anything from infrastructure to equipment, basically anything that was like roads or heavy equipment or buildings. So we have done it every year. That's what Stuart saying. It wasn't codified. The other thing another way to codify it, council could pass legislation saying something that some cities will actually, when I was in Alliance, our city council actually passed an ordinance that said, a certain percent, 10% of income tax will go to the capital fund. And that would obviously ebb and flow. If you had a good year, more would go, bad year, less would go. I'm not so sure if the charter would be a good place. Only because, let me give you an example. Say, for example, this current situation, I don't think it's going to happen, but say it would be a horrible depression and we committed a certain dollar figure and we had say we bring in 20 million tax revenues. What if that was cut by 10 and we said, okay, 5 million a year is going to go there. And then we had $5 million that was going to capital, but you would have to lay off, a ton of people. And point being is that those capital monies might just build and build and build and build and build. You may have, $20 million in capital funds, but nobody to, you know, do your, actually complete your infrastructure, things like that. So I just would be careful as far as codifying something in our charter, because that would be very tough to change if something had to happen. Whereas city council, you'd have to have at least, you'd have to have obviously 4 votes for something to, you know, to change. It's still difficult to change, but it gives you a little more latitude than once every 10 years in the vote of the people, because that's you never know from year to year. But anyway, that's my 2 cents, if that makes any sense.
Andre, I agree that we don't want to commit to a fixed amount, but I think back during the discussion of the income tax increase was, you know, the 25 basis points of the rate. So if your total take went down, you're just allocating a portion of whatever it is, not a fixed dollar amount.
Right. And that was the same methodology. Like I said, when I was in Alliance, they did the same thing.
All right, Mr. Fitzgibbon, does that assist you in some way?
Well, I guess the question for the group is do we want to suggest that an agreed upon portion, and even if we just say we wish council to do that, that there ought to be some directive to say that there should be monies allocated to capital improvements.
Well, it says that, doesn't it? May create, maintain a capital improvement fund.
Yeah, and I think we want something potentially a little bit better than may.
I would caution putting definitive language in the charter, because you are then taking away the responsibility of the mayor and of the councils at that point in the future that they struggle with this, and it's a yearly basis. But as Andre says, if you have things in the charter, it's really difficult to change charter language. So you have to be very careful of what you put in there, and ordinances and your elected officials are really charged with determining what needs have to be done each year in a capital form. So, I'd be very careful about getting too structured in an amount or a percentage on this. I guess you could say capital infrastructure shall be funded each year. And then you're not saying in what amounts, and then council could determine what amounts along with the administration for each year thereafter. But
Yeah, and I think, Bob, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to tie anybody's hands. But I think just that notion of council shall fund it as opposed to may fund it, I think that would be plenty.
I don't know, Andre or Joel, do either of you have any thoughts on that? Is that even getting too strong in that, or I'm trying to think through if I've ever run into something where that would have been detrimental to have it as a shall, because you
Yeah.
could fund it, $100 and you funded it, so you shall do that. But
Right.
This is Beth. Stuart, could I ask what your concern is about how it reads currently?
Well,
Or your intent in making the language stronger?
well, again, it goes back to the income tax campaign of several years ago,
Mhm.
where the city asked for 1.5%, and it was an increase from 1%. So you had 0.5%. And of that half, a part of how the city got support for that 0.5% increase was making a commitment that half of that increase would be designated toward capital expenditures. Because back then, the roads were falling apart, the parks were in disrepair. There were a lot of issues that the community felt that there needed to be a source of funding to keep those things up.
Okay.
I'm just trying to, keep faith with what happened over the last decade to say that we ought to at least encourage that there should be designated capital monies.
Okay, so the promise was made in the past, and this would evidence our compliance with our promise.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So changing the word from may to shall, though, would not really help much because, as mayor says, the shall could be $100 a year. You're not seeking to make it a quarter of the income tax, are you?
Well, I guess I'm inclined to agree with the administration's position. We don't want to be too specific, but I think we just need to at least directionally acknowledge that that needs to be on the table.
How do you propose to keep it on the table? By changing the language?
That was why I was asking the question, but I'm just throwing that out for consideration by the whole group. I don't want to unilaterally impose something.
Well, why don't we do this? I could add that in just so we can talk about it more if that's something that everyone's on board with, or a majority of us are on board with. Why don't we just run through everyone and see where we all stand on that? So I know Stuart's in favor of it. Stuart is in favor of it. So Carol, what do you think?
I think it may create more problems than it solves. I understand. Is it, sorry, I'm trying to write and listen at the same time. So is it anywhere else written that the 0.5% goes to the capital improvement? Is there specific language that designates that 0.5%?
So, well, not that. This is Andre. If I may, we do have a city council some time ago, even before my time here. They did pass some best practices, policies, procedures, whereby they said that they wanted the capital fund to have a balance equal to annual what's called governmental depreciation. So what that means is depreciation is an expense basically of our assets lives being utilized. So the more assets you have, the higher your depreciation amount is going to be. So that amount is, when I started here, it was 3 million. Now I think we're up to 4 million in annual depreciation. So that was, I think, their way of saying, hey, you got to make sure you set aside enough money to try to fund your capital assets. Now, and again, it's not, the difference is I guess it's an ordinance, and you can, if you have to, you can change, your ordinance, or I guess, I don't hate to say this, but not abide by our ordinance, because when times were bad, we didn't abide by the ordinance back in 2000, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10, some of those years. And sometimes it will dip below that amount, during the year. And then sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll be twice that. Like a couple of years, it's been 2 to 3 times the depreciation amount. So it does fluctuate, but there is that method, and I could send it all to you. I can look it up here.
But it is an ordinance that council passed, and if, like Andre said, if there were any violations of that, that's something that has to be published, so I remember back in those days prior to the income tax, when there wasn't enough money to do that, well, that had to be discussed and published, publicly,
Yeah.
and people had to approve that deviation from that. So it was very public that was taking place. But because it was an ordinance, it did allow us some, a little bit of wiggle room until we were able to pass the income tax at that point. All that being said, I don't know, Andre, I don't really see a negative of changing the word from may to shall, do you?
No.
This is Martha Bollinger. I looked up the key difference between shall is generally used to express an intended provision in the form of offers or suggestions. On the other hand, may is generally used to express possibility or permission. There's also
Correct.
used
So-
to denote wish or hope. Shall is considered to be more formal than may.
Well, so in legal writing, shall means we have to.
Must.
May means it's optional. So the worry that I could see there is it would give you less flexibility. So where Andre was kind of saying there may be some years where you may need to use that money for something else. This would restrict us, and it would always make us have to put that money there or always have that fund. Okay?
Yeah. So I looked up the exact language, and so the exact language says that it says on December 31st of each year, basically the government shall have a cash balance in the capital improvements fund, which is at a minimum equal to the value of annual depreciation of governmental fund assets. It says, provided that if authorized by a vote of 3/4 of its membership, City Council may adopt an annual appropriation ordinance which varies from the foregoing requirement. So when if the 3/4 of council votes, that we can vary, and that has happened in the past. So
And by doing this, you would take away that flexibility.
Well, it looks like there is some legal protection for it, and something has to be done legally by the council to vary from that, which would bring it to the attention of the public, it would seem to me.
Well, I'm sorry, this is Beth. I'm also wondering if we change it to shall, use the stronger language, and yet the action taken is to minimally fund it, say $100, to use our example. Are we not, in fact, sending the exact wrong message that we want to send? If the intent is to evidence that we're following through on a promise made when the income tax was passed, and yet we just minimally fund it, that seems to be shooting ourselves in the foot. So I guess I'm not particularly in favor of it. I think it's too strong to put in the charter, particularly if we have language elsewhere that requires it.
This is Martha Bollinger. I agree with what Beth just stated. I think it should stay may.
Jennifer, what do you think? I don't think we heard from you yet.
Maybe if you'd asked me a month ago, I might have felt differently, but in light of the current world situation where what Andrea said, it was you could find yourself in a situation where that shall could, I think it wouldn't be the best decision, and then to put $100 in again would be like an insult. Like you were kind of making a joke of it, really, almost. So I agree with the keeping may.
And Mr. Long, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly understand Stuart's sentiments on this. I would like to see us continue to fund capital expenditures. I don't know. I'm not too worried that if we put the word shall in there, that there's a circumstance that it's not going to be funded. And if that happens, I mean, we have bigger problems than that. But I don't know. I'm relatively agnostic on the change. I think as a practical matter, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's in both instances going to depend on the good faith of council to make good decisions.
Okay, Ms. Dyer?
I'm for leaving it as is. It gives more flexibility to the council, which is directly responsible to the voters.
Mr. Webster?
I'm in favor of leaving it as is. And my rationale is because we're going to be proposing these on the ballot as all changes for one article. I would hate for there to be any confusion over the changing of the language, that we wouldn't be able to get the more important change made from in 605, the change from division to fund.
Okay. And Mr. Weaver?
I don't think it makes that great a difference either. I did like the notion that using the word shall indicates that the city has a commitment to maintain a capital improvement fund and shall from time to time transfer appropriate thereto all monies. I don't think that really limits it, but at the same time, it's not something I think is worth fighting.
Okay. Then for right now, I'm going to leave it out of the draft. We can revisit this if you guys think about it and you decide that you think that it's we can read it. For now, I'm going to leave it out of the draft.
Okay, I'm fine with that, John.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgibbon, for bringing that issue to our attention. That ends, as I understand, pretty much everything we had set for discussion at this point. Do you agree, Mr. Scovelli?
I do.
All right. You asked, my memory fails me, but I think you mentioned that somewhere along the line you were going to be unavailable.
That would have been the 29th, but I'm looking at our next meeting should probably be the 22nd.
All right. So I guess we kind of agreed that we would meet every other month. Is that still, we missed one meeting. Is that still acceptable to the city that we continue on that schedule?
Right now, I think we're doing pretty well.
All right.
Well, if we slow down, we may need to up our meetings, but for right now, I think we're doing pretty good.
All right. And I would,
Maybe.
or
When's the next meeting?
It'd be on the 22nd. The 22nd.
22nd of April at 5:30. Is that agreeable to everybody?
But we
Yes.
use the same format.
Most likely we will be because the
May 1st lockdown.
until May 1st. So yeah.
All right. And then we'll review Article 7 and 8 at the next meeting. And
Yeah. Who was assigned to those?
7 and 8 would be Mr. Long and Mr. Fitzgibbon.
Yep.
Okay, very good.
All right. Do I have somebody wanting to say something? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. This is Stuart Webster.
Mr. Webster, a second.
Dyer.
Mrs. Dyer, seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right. I'm sorry. Do we have any input, Mr. Scovelli, from the public?
We did not. If we do next time, I will let you know. But we went between about 9 to 4 viewers back and forth, and nobody typed anything in the comments.
All right, then we're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Stay healthy.
Yes, please.
How do we get out of here?
I think John has to release us.
I'll end the meeting. So I'm just going to stop the live.